Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adnan. I'm one of your room hosts. I have some important housekeeping information to share with you. Emergency exits are out the back to your left. Bathrooms are down the right to the hall. Just remember to silence your devices during the session, please. And then please remember to share your feedback after the session, please, as well. For this session, the evolution of large-scale enterprise public cloud adoption, please welcome to the stage Andrew Coe, David Catanoso, George Mansoor, Peter O'Donoghue, and our moderator, Tim Timmy.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. We can't see you because of the theatrical lighting here, but we know you're out there. And if you feel like moving down a little bit so I don't see a row of empty aluminum arches in front of me, that would be welcome also. I'm Tom Temin from Federal News Network. I host the daily show, The Federal Drive with Tom Temin, weekdays 1500 a.m. and here in Washington, online at federalnewsnetwork.com for the past 12 or 13 years. And it's really great to be here working with companies and agencies that I know of and respect. I have to tell you, I was associated with the very first event ever in the Washington Convention Center. Is anyone from out of town? Show of hands in the murky depths. Here's a factoid that if the exhibit halls downstairs were opened up completely, you could lay the Washington Monument down on its side and fit inside the halls that constitute this convention center. I have an aluminum casting of the building when it first opened. The show then was called Fosse. Anyone remember Fosse? Oh yes, I hear some moans and groans. At Fosse we saw copiers, we saw about 15 different PC manufacturers. You probably don't even know the brand of PC anymore that you even have, much less how big the hard drive is and all that stuff. We had shrink-wrapped Lotus 123 on display. That was what Fosse was back then. No thought of cloud computing or the services-oriented type of IT infrastructure that we've talked about now. And so we're going to go into some large-scale thoughts from both the vendor side and from the industry side, and from the consumer side, the large agency user side, and see what some of the issues are today. So to my immediate left, I'm left-handed, so I'm left-right challenged, you'll forgive me, is Peter O'Donoghue. He's Vice President of Unisys Federal Systems. To his left is Dave Catanoso. He's Director for Enterprise Cloud Solutions at the Veterans Affairs Department, and Veterans Affairs is a leader in a lot of these areas. Sometimes you don't hear the good stories about Veterans Affairs, but there are a lot of them, and you're going to hear one today. To his left is George Mansoor. He's Chief Information Systems Manager, so that you're kind of like a SISM, right? That's one we don't have in the federal government, at Cal State University. And to his left is Andrew Coe, Managing Director for Education at AWS. So I guess we could say education is kind of big business the way big federal agencies are big business. So you can fill in on the technical issues often aren't that different. And so we're going to ask these panelists some questions. We have about 45 minutes, and maybe we'll have a couple minutes for your questions at the end. And I guess we should really start with the primary motivation for cloud migration. It used to be, well, because someone in the White House said so, because he thought it was a good idea. Well, he's been gone for 15 years now, but nevertheless left this legacy of cloud migration. But I'd like to start with VA and Cal State. What are the real motivations that you're doing this cloud migration for? And maybe give us a little bit of a description in a minute or so of what the cloud migration looks like for your agency. Dave, why don't we start with you?
So I'll go first. So for the VA, it's really two main drivers. It's to reduce costs and increase flexibility, right? We serve millions of veterans every day, a variety of services across three major lines of business, benefits, health, and cemetery administration. And so we're constantly serving veterans, and our secretary has given us a priority to increase customer service and provide world-class customer service to our veterans. So it's all about innovating and delivering services faster and freeing up funds from budgets that are heavily weighed down by sustainment costs of traditional IT, freeing those funds up so we can redirect them towards sustainment. Towards innovation and delivering services to veterans.
And what have you done so far in that lift?
So what we're doing right now is we've established two things. We have a cloud strategy that involves using software as a service whenever possible. That's really a big driver for us. We recently completed a major migration for productivity suites to move 480,000 VA mailboxes to the cloud. We're also using software as a service for our IT service desk and for a lot of customer relationship management tools. And then beyond that, we're building an enterprise cloud to provide a common landing area to move our applications to, so that it makes it easier for applications to migrate to the cloud, and we can get that cost savings and innovative capability.
And you're doing a lot, from my understanding. I've had actually some of your folks in my studio talking about the encapsulation and the microservices you're surrounding these old legacy applications for, to give them new life, and also to be able to reimagine them with the logic they have, but in the new architectures. Right.
So we're handling the migration in a couple ways. Certain applications, whether it's due to time constraints or contractual constraints, we're doing what they call lift and shift, where we're moving them over from a traditional environment and architecting them the same way that they run today in the cloud, and then we're going to optimize them, break them into microservices, and refactor them for the cloud later. Other applications have a little bit enough time to do that up front. So one of our mobile application suites did that during the migration, and they went from a traditional infrastructure prior to migration to a containerized infrastructure now that they're in the cloud. So we're kind of mixing and matching that approach depending on the situation to get maximum throughput and move applications as quickly as possible.
Okay, and George, I think of education in the same way I think of VA, in the sense that you have distributed physical properties throughout a large area and so on.
We do. We serve the state of California. We have 23 universities serving about 460 or so thousand students, and the big motivator there is our users, our customers, so to speak. Our students are very different today than they were 10, 15 years ago. They're expecting different kinds of services in different ways. We operate in a series of legacy applications that don't quite fit the way they would like to be served. We're using this, our general cloud strategy, so that we can better deliver services the way they're hoping to get delivered, so that we can remove some obstacles towards their graduation. You know, the CSU is a unique institution that serves a lot of first-time students, first-time higher ed students. Little things are blockers. Small little things that folks can get accustomed to first time. Not just their first time, but there's a lot of obstacles for students, and we're trying to eliminate those obstacles. We have an initiative around improving our graduation rates, our retention rates, and enabling our enterprise systems through a migration to public cloud is part of that.
Yeah, so for both Cal State and an organization as diverse as VA, that looking at it from the prospective customers or constituents' point of view seems to be essential to this whole idea of the cloud. My healthy vet and my blue button updated and all of that, all that kind of stuff. I can remember in college, my grades came on a perforated printout of a 3270 thing, green and white. So the postman knew whether I made Dean's List or not before I did. I guess kids today won't accept that as a way of delivering.
Yeah, that's not how they tend to look at things.
And Peter from Unisys, I think of you as almost a value-added player in between customers of large-scale and large-scale cloud providers like AWS. What do the federal customers, the large-scale public sector people coming to you, what are their concerns writ large? What do you see across the board?
Well, so concerns, I think the newness of it all. I mean, I think what's interesting is, as a systems integrator, we've been asking ourselves, like a lot of folks who are systems integrated around the Beltway are trying to have been wondering and kind of grappling with what our role is in cloud. If you think, there's a lot of SIs who felt like Azure and AWS would be like a threat to their existence, right? But the reality that we see is, and actually to answer your question related to the concerns is I've been a practitioner of IT for over 20 years now, and I've always felt like the rate of change and the rate of innovation in IT has been amazing. But it seems to have just become increasingly caffeinated over time. And what we're finding is actually, I'm sitting right next to truly two peers and two clients that we deeply respect. and have a really good sense of how they want to use cloud. But the amount of change that clients are actually trying to grapple with is profound. Actually, the role of systems integrators actually I think is never been more relevant, right? So to get back to your actual question, everything ranges from how do I consume cloud? How do I actually establish a contract for cloud so actually it's flexible enough to deal with price changes and rates of the amount of innovation that's going on? How do I deal with my people? Like I've got a bunch of folks who I've trained and certified on running data centers, and actually we've implemented ITIL. We're really happy with kind of a waterfall approach to how we do service delivery. How does service delivery change in the cloud? Actually, some of the other kind of really almost existential questions are, I think the best practice in terms of security design, say 10 years ago, was I've got a data center. I'm going to stick a big old boundary around that. I'm going to firewall the heck out of it, and that's kind of the foundation of my security approach. As you move to the cloud, actually those same strategies don't seem to work anymore. And you also have the issue of compliance, right? So if you think of FISMA coming in 2002, it was really a different era. That having a paper-based checklist kind of philosophy for certifying compliance with your applications, your workloads. I think William Butler Yeats is an Irishman. I'm going to quote William Butler Yeats, which is one of my favorite poems is all is changed utterly. And actually we find that our clients really struggling with the rate of change. And the investments that we're making in terms of certifying and training people, but actually building out offerings and frankly, doing the pilots and doing the hard yards, I think it's really important for us to be able to make those investments so that we can help our clients out.
And is hard yards a rugby term?
It probably is, yeah.
Okay. Right now soccer is on television, and I have a high-def large screen in my studio, so I can get distracted watching the women play soccer over there in France. All right, and Andrew, I mean, I think of Amazon. Amazon as one of those things that now it's been around a long time, both in our professional lives and in our personal lives. And so, to me, it never gets less than amazing, all of these things, all of these technologies. And so, as a driver of change fundamentally, yet you're also almost a closed loop feedback with clients, because as Amazon changes and they must change, and so you've got this dynamic going. What do you see as the primary motivators, and where can people go wrong when they think about
well, thank you
migration?
for the question. I'd say the primary motivators, I would say, have started. This AWS, as many of you know, is not a new thing. It's been around for, I think, now 11 years or 12 years. And I think in the beginning, the conversation was always about why, or what is the cloud? And I think there's been a lot of that education over time. There's been a tremendous amount of adoption. And I think I'd say three things where I feel that the challenges that we're seeing in order to really accelerate, especially some of these large migration, is now when and how are the type of questions that we're getting asked. And the three things that we usually see, I'd say common, even in education and probably maybe similar to other types of agencies and institutions, is people, money, and governance. And that's where we find that it's not roadblocks, but there are slowdowns, or I'll call it areas that they didn't have to think about before. And people, I think Peter definitely touched upon it. There's a lack of talent of individuals who know that skill. And that's why we actually rely tremendously on partners like Unisys who've gone through that type of program. So there's a level of assurance that they can adopt. Or we can have a direct training type of plan, but we all know that you just can't learn something one day and the next thing you know, you're spinning up 1,000 servers. So in between, there has to be some sort of smart way of making sure that they're migrating. And so that is a profound, I'll say, a challenge, but not an unsurmountable obstacle that can't be overcome. The money, CapEx versus OpEx. So when people are very interested, and especially in education where CapEx and OpEx are so tight, I had one time a particular CIO state that, hey, I would love to go to the cloud, I want to go all in, but as I am looking at the bond money that I have issued or the way the budgets are fixed, I can't put it over to OpEx, because the conversation that will come back to me is, well, how many people do I have to remove in order to hire that? And I don't think that's the answer at all. So we've been working with different creative ways in order to look at certain types of other solutions and certain types of ways of acquiring certain types of reserve instances. But right now, that is an area that definitely comes up often, and we can definitely be creative and on that. And third thing is governance. Back then, software, current type of, we'll call it traditional software and hardware acquisitions, there's a linear process. But when it comes to governance, not only are you changing some of the way you're going to acquire it, but now how you manage it. Do you really need all this network system operations folks? Or yes, but the answer is they may be doing some things differently.
Yeah, so once you get to that
nirvana
stage of OpEx,
yeah,
you have to know what to do with
right.
it.
So that journey is not necessarily a simple, you go to A, go to B. There's other type of organizational conversations that need to happen, as well as even the skill sets, and even how the stakeholder feedback comes in. And those are new things, but I think it's positive. But at the end of the day, we're finding all the agility, the cost savings, and all those benefits, and that's why we continuously see a tremendous amount of growth, but also great, customer stories that like we have up here.
All right, I want to ask George and Dave deeper in the human capital side of this. When the data center consolidation initiatives came down the road, and by the way, they date back to the Reagan administration, success of too many computers in the government, we had what they called server huggers.
Yeah.
Well, now as the cloud era comes on, you have data center huggers, people with really long arms, or maybe they lock hands around the data center, I'm not sure, a lot of them. But what are some of the human capital, both the cultural and also the direct skill issues that you encounter when you have to explain why, yes, we had a data center, distributed data centers in the mumps era, but that's not the way we're going in the future. Dave?
So at the VA, obviously, we're a very large organization, and we're going to have individuals with different skill sets, different career paths. But we're not looking at it as a way to necessarily cut costs in terms of personnel. It's really how do we leverage those personnel with the deep experience with the Veterans Administration and serving veterans to focus more on that aspect of the mission. So people may be trained up to work in the cloud, or they may be able to focus more on application delivery, but it's more about what you're going to be doing to serve veterans, not that you're going to be doing it to serve veterans. So it's really, we're trying to move the culture in that direction, provide training opportunities, get people to understand the cloud, how it can benefit, how it can help us ultimately provide service to veterans, which is what everybody at the VA is really about, or should be. So.
But is it safe to say that if you're going to have it, if you are an application owner or a business owner, your staff needs specific technical skills to operate that application and develop it and keep at it when it's in the cloud?
Sure.
And using the cloud-provided services, or the cloud provider-provided services, versus when it was on your own 3270 system.
Right, so we're going to see that, and what we did in the short term, because you wouldn't have those people on staff immediately, is we partnered up with organizations like Unisys to bring in that expertise and be able to provide us that unbiased advice in terms of architecture and strategy. And then we've got other contractors that we brought in to help us with the implementation, operations, and migration while we train up our staff and get them up to speed, kind of to help us coach us along and get us there. And then as we train up our staff, we'll be able to deliver more services faster and better.
George?
Yeah, similar story at the CSU. I think the big lesson learned pretty early on was constantly reinforcing the message as to why we're doing this. And it's to focus on the end is not to get our services in the cloud. That's just today is how we do that thing. But the end is that focus on student services, improving graduation rates and those sorts of things. And reminding folks that we're not really changing what we're doing, we're just changing how we're doing it. And that just needs to be a message that's constantly reinforced. And then through that, bringing expertise in through our partners to help us today, because we got to get there, and then investing time, energy, and dollars in training our current folks, because they bring a lot of institutional knowledge, and we don't want to lose that.
And a total outsider question, do computer science departments help at all, or having one there?
So we haven't leveraged, unfortunately, our computer science departments as well as we should have. That's something that we need to take a look at.
Well, there's also something to be said for not letting the lunatics run the asylum. No comment. Okay, good. Peter, I think you've got some perspective on the human capital side, seeing it as the vendor coming in.
I do, absolutely. So actually, at the risk of embarrassing our clients here, I would say that, like one perspective, I think the work that's underway right now at the VA, I think the demonstration of, actually Andy talked about it this morning in his fireside chat with Teresa, is the importance of the unmistakable and unrelenting commitment from executives to ensure that there really is the executive support to adoption at scale. I think we've experienced that with both of you, and I think the encapsulation of that commitment, and also like the manifestation throughout an organization, the establishment of a cloud PMO, I think has been enormously helpful. I think with you all, making sure that not only did you have effective training plans, but also that you had the support to actually kind of show how to fish and to be able to kind of accelerate the adoption, I think has been really important. But I think making sure folks actually really understand that this isn't just a passing phase. I mean, what you want is that you want this to be kind of not a Peter thing or a Dave thing or a George thing, the folks who come behind us, that we've just kind of gone the first couple of steps. And actually the combination of executive buy-in, the training and certification actually at scale, and actually to be able to get through, I think some magic numbers are 10 to 20% of a workforce. You start seeing people becoming, they become first of all cloud immigrants, and then actually at a 10 to 20% scale, you start seeing kind of a pivot to cloud natives. So they start kind of like, leaving kind of thinking behind, like traditional data center thinking behind, and actually start adopting to like, how do I do DevOps and how do I move at scale and move faster? And actually establishing a cloud PMO or a center of enablement so that the engineering standards and the best practices are established as knowledge artifacts and can be coached, and you can get access to folks who can kind of phone a friend. But actually one of the things about cloud that's actually pretty interesting and you can really leverage is that you can take knowledge, human knowledge, in terms of best practices, and it doesn't necessarily need to be written up on a SharePoint site, but it can be deployed as a template. And when you templatize engineering best practices, you can preclude bad things from happening in terms of leaving ports open or leaving things unencrypted, or frankly, making sure that that the right security settings or the right images are used. Actually, that's one of the beauties of cloud done well, and actually we see great things happening with both of our clients in that respect.
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's parallel to what happened in personal computing, where once we had everything on our own floppy disks, clicking back and forth, you had a double disk drive, and then hard drives came in, and now today, fast forwarding 30 years, in my case, 35 years, nobody thinks twice about the fact that all of that resource, including your 10,000 personal pictures, are not in your house, literally, but they're yours as if they were. So maybe organizationally, that's the mindset you have to get over, that it's still programming, it's still good ITIL practices, it's still good project management practices, only the machine is not whirling with the tapes down the hall. Mm-hmm. Comment?
It's the number one
Besides
challenge.
absolute agreement.
I'm absolute agreement. I mean, that's a +1 in our lingo that we say that. And even in education, I know it may not be particularly relevant to large scale, but in education, the mission of education many times is also, how do I get my students to get jobs? So even the talent, there's a pipeline that we are also working on. If you were in the keynote yesterday where we had George Mason, President Angel Cabrera, mentioned now the 4-year cloud degree. It started with the 2-year, but if you peel back the onion, many of you are parents or aunts and uncles of students in the education system. There's no pathway right now in the education system. So we are advocating and building that pathway through curriculum so that we have much more of a funnel pipeline of individuals who know that skill. And that is very, very important, and we're seeing that adopt. So hopefully in the future, we can have more skilled individuals who can really address a lot of the challenges and the technical gaps that we have today.
Okay, I wanted to talk about something specific, and that is the idea of systems of record, because the ATO, the authority to operate a system of record in the federal government, is a very precise process, and we sometimes, in saying that things like cybersecurity or getting ATOs for systems of record should not simply be compliance exercises, and yet you have to have compliance before you can get past compliance. It's kind of a dichotomy there. So how has cloud adoption in large-scale systems changed the approach, I guess it's a governance question, to the compliance issues and to the ATO issues for your systems of record? Dave?
Okay, so at the VA, getting an authority to operate, ATO, has always been a fairly lengthy process. I mean, we used to measure it in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, sometimes longer. And one of the goals we set out as we developed the enterprise cloud was to see if we could figure out ways to expedite that process. And at the VA, security of veteran data is paramount, right? It's our job number one. I mean, most of the information we keep on veterans is private or personally identifiable information, PII, or personal health information, PHI. So we have to keep that very, very secure. And then we've established, for example, one of the reasons we chose Amazon was because it has a FedRAMP High certification, and we're using that as the foundation for everything that we deploy into the cloud when it has real data in it. And so what we do is when we built the enterprise cloud, we built it on top of the Amazon FedRAMP certification. And first we achieved an ATO for the basic level of Amazon services. And then what we did is we built the enterprise cloud infrastructure on top of that, which adds additional security controls and provides additional common services to our applications so they don't have to, and they can do it in best practice ways. And then that simplifies the number of controls they have to address for their ATO. So by using inheritance, which is now possible using FedRAMP, we can rapidly inherit controls from Amazon, then we inherit those and pass them on to our client applications who can then inherit them from us, and the ATO process is very quick. We've got it down to a few months, and our record is, I think, 19 days.
So the process is not the first time like they've ever seen it for every time there's a new application.
Right. So they very quickly now we can jumpstart an application with over half their controls, depending on whether they're using PAS or SAS or IaaS and what the mixture is. It varies, the number of controls they have to address, but
Sure.
we pass on as many as we can, and it simplifies their application package.
Yeah, so that inheritance sounds like a pretty important concept in the
It's huge, yeah.
whole thing. And I guess that relates to what you said about, I'm going to fall off here, about templates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think I like about these stories is we see that. I mean, one of the problems with cloud is if you walk the floor and actually see some of the cloud consoles, it's very easy to spin up an environment and actually establish virtual machines and attach storage, et cetera, to them. But to do it at scale, I think there's I would foot some of the points that are being made here is that. We see clients here establishing enterprise platforms and actually taking very seriously and addressing very seriously that when FISMA came into effect and we all started implementing the risk management framework. There's a lot of folks who are still implementing it in kind of a very waterfall, paper-driven, control by control Excel spreadsheet, and kind of very much a checkbox in kind of an auditing manner. The reality is that I think that process was, under extreme stress with Agile and DevOps anyway. But what we're finding is that the very best out there, and I'm going to point to my neighbor here, has recognized that there's a number of things that need to happen, right? One is that this idea of inheritance, the idea that we're going to basically kind of build a thick shell. And actually that shell we're going to declare to be secure because these sets of controls are defined. And then we're going to build another kind of layer over top of that. So that doesn't happen by accident. That requires having the CISO shop completely on board and actually completely aligned to attaining this vision. So actually you can kind of modify your process so you can allow these things to go faster. The other thing I think we tend not to kind of focus on, or we don't foot stomp, but I think this is an emerging area that I'm personally super excited about with compliance. And that is, when I think of the cloud, I mean, there's many different ways to think about the cloud. But one way I think about the cloud is a set of APIs that are addressable, and you can ask questions of APIs. And what that means is that if you've established a set of controls, let's say we've got an application running at FISMA High, I can ask AWS and Azure APIs, hey, am I compliant with these sets of standards, with these rule sets? And actually, we're working with George actually to implement some of these things as well. Actually, we're in pilot mode. But the point is that compliance we tend to think of as I've attained my ATO and I'm done. Well, actually, there's a sixth phase of the risk management framework, which is continuous compliance. And I believe, done well, that the cloud represents an opportunity to be actually at least as compliant, but actually without trying too hard, to be far more compliant and to be far more transparent in terms of your compliant posture than you've ever been before. And actually it allows you to demonstrate when you've actually become non-compliant and actually where you've drifted from compliance, and
Sure.
you can automate it. So it's a really exciting time.
So it's
from a
not like
compliance perspective.
holding your nose and jumping after a 10-month process.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's really there.
Yep.
And George, we didn't hear from you on
Yeah,
on
I
that
mean,
whole
just
process.
this is an area that we're kind of right there tackling with it right now. It's an area where the technology has really advanced such that it's showing how our policies aren't able to keep up. And so that's kind of what we're trying to address right now. The things that we're able to do, that Peter was just talking about, our policies don't quite cover that. And so now it's a matter of working with our information security folks and getting us all on that same page. We're comfortable that we're secure. It doesn't really align to how we think what security is all about today. So that's where we're at right now.
And a follow-on question maybe for the larger community, many of the federal agencies operate in highly regulated environments. For example, in a nuclear setting, at one time, if you changed a screw, in a PC, you had to make sure that you had to get all kinds of compliance tests done and so forth. You couldn't change one bit on one setting for something, say, controlling a nuclear plant. Probably still the case. How do you keep that continuous compliance where you might need to change something, add a control, there's a new threat that comes through, a new vector, and yet you're in a highly regulated set of circumstances where their policy may not have caught up with this idea of inheritance and continuous compliance?
Well, I'm not in the nuclear business, but what we have seen.
It seems that way on some of the campuses.
No, but perhaps. But for us, where we see compliance also be extremely important is not just the sensitivity of the information, but compliance changes. In education, it's not just at a federal level or a particular project, but there's legislation for student privacy. They're sometimes local, or sometimes at a county level. And so what we've been doing is, there's no automated way, but what we've been doing is to help a lot of our partners as well as our customers keep abreast of what those changes are. And some of our customers want to actually go beyond their particular state boundaries or university boundaries to share information. That gets into a whole nother world. And then if you go out of the country, which education does, I mean, there's a lot of online learning that happens. So there's different, we'll call it compliance levels, I would even say. There's even at the project level to all the different regulations and a variety of those things. So what we have to do is we also will walk alongside our customers and partners and make sure that they're educated on the latest updates to make sure that, so we have an entire matrix that we create around the world. All the areas where at a country level or at a local city level, all those type of compliance, that is not a static document, but it's something dynamic because as those things change. If there's one that we find extremely tough, that's where we'll usually work with other partners to see if we can make some of those policy changes that happens.
Okay, two anecdotes that are going to lead to a question. Based on interviews I've had in the last few days. As I was telling Dave beforehand, I just interviewed the center director for VA's medical center in Tomah, Wisconsin. It serves 17 counties. It's 2.5 hours from Milwaukee. It's an hour and a half out of Madison. It's big catchment area, people that don't have ready access to a lot. Troubled place. Horrible labor relations, terrible medical outcomes. A Marine died from an opioid overdose. Well, the woman that took that over is also an award winner, a national award winner for turning that place completely around. So it's not as if VA doesn't act on these things. And so now it has risen up to the top third of VA centers in quality outcomes. And this all involved multiple discussions with the union stakeholders, the community stakeholders, VA itself. I think Congress was even part of this, and including the family of the deceased Marine. So amazing story of overcoming something and being very public about it, nothing to hide. The second one was from FEMA. Today and tomorrow, Congress is debating the continuance of the federal flood insurance program. Controversial, actuarially bankrupt, it loses billions of dollars every year, and yet it's a program and so on. FEMA, to help out, has started publishing tens of millions of records on policies, millions of records on claims going back 40 years. Literally just today the APIs were made public. So what I'm getting at is cloud computing, how can it help what is a very important drive across all federal agencies, and that is the drive toward open government?
So I'll go
Want
first.
to take a stab at that?
I'll go first, I guess. So we have a couple API initiatives that we're working on. Mainly, it wasn't so much for the idea of open government, though they would serve that purposes, but to standardize interfaces between applications, right? Instead of having dedicated hardwired connections to databases that are proprietary for a given application, making it difficult to upgrade or migrate or interface, we're looking at generating standardized APIs for accessing common veteran information, financial information, data on performance, things like that, so that could be available to other applications that we're building. So we are working in that direction.
Because VA has a long history of collaborating with outside groups on common medical issues, say traumatic brain injury or PTSD, those kinds of things where you have unique and large data sets. And I guess the API cloud architecture can make those properly anonymized and so forth available to researchers you may never have heard of.
That's correct, yep. And we're looking at doing that, and among other things with the research community, genomics. I think large data, big data is becoming very possible in the cloud when it wasn't possible before.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that the cloud has really helped us do recently is, we've launched a data lake initiative, and we're pushing all of our student data out there. And for us, it would have been the cost of doing that in a non-cloud way would have been a non-starter. With the volume of data that we're looking at, we just couldn't get enough gear. We couldn't put it someplace. It's just, we're generating about, for us, it's about 5 terabytes of data a day. Not big, but it gets big pretty quickly. And
5 terabytes a day?
Correct. Yeah.
That adds up.
Yeah, it's a little bit, right? And so there's a lot of data out there, and we feel that that's in there is the answer to, maybe not, but we don't know yet because we haven't really put it all in a usable way. Up until now that we have these capabilities, the answer to our retention and graduation rate issues. And again, without being able to start that process, that initial investment to move down that pathway has stopped us for all these years. And now that this is something that we've been able to do pretty recently, we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so Andrew, are we getting close to a holy grail that has been talked about for 30 years now or so, and that is analysis and operations on the same data set?
Absolutely, and I think it goes back to even the cloud. I think we start off with a lift and shift, but now what we've seen also really change out there is mission driven. Okay, now you've done all this stuff, saved the money, and now we're agile. Now we're starting to see provosts get involved, academic officers, presidents, and so it's everything from how do I map what a student's patterns are so that he or she could get a job, to patterns of success and patterns of failure. As what George was saying before, we have one case study at Ivy Tech Community College. I think your peer, Brendan Aldridge, the chief data officer for Cal State, came from. They had that same problem. And for many of you that may not know Ivy Tech Community College in Indiana, they're several 100,000 students, community college, so there's a lot of transient type of individuals coming here to try to get some study. And they were trying to figure out why were they having such a high dropout rate. And they had this antiquated data warehouse. They would take literally, I think the story is, they'd be able to query one question every 40 minutes. And so it was like, I don't know if they have a gerbil underneath there, but it was tiring. So they would literally say they would do that and then go get coffee, read the newspaper, come back, hit another question. So what is that, 8 questions a day, 8 to 12 questions a day? And that wasn't working.
At a particular point in time,
at
right?
Point in time, yeah, you had to wait.
I mean,
hit it too much, it'll start spinning even crazy.
Yeah.
But so what they did is they put that into the cloud, and now they were accessing it so much easier at a scalable pace, and they were hitting that thing a couple questions every minute. And they started then to go, well, what about outside of the student data and some of the learning data? Let's go look at other data sets. And that's where the beauty of that was, where data warehouses and dashboards, don't get fooled with just the dashboards, those are just good analytics. They started to incorporate machine learning. What were the algorithms actually seeing? And now at Ivy Tech Community College, they can, within the first 2 weeks of a student enrolling with 83% accuracy, determine if that student's at risk. And there's an intervention team that goes out there and help. And one of the greatest stories of what they discovered through this data, we'll call it evolution, students weren't buying books in the first 2 weeks. Now, at first you go, that's so obvious. They weren't going to the bookstore and buying books.
Right.
So if you think about it, it's so logical, it's so obvious, but at the same time, their systems weren't They weren't trained to look at that. They were looking at attendance and grade point averages and tests, but one of the sources where they weren't doing the fundamental stuff like that. So now they've increased, and have the ability to not only increase or have a higher retention rate, but also even improve grades.
So unlike the beer and the diapers, this story really happened.
Oh, it's happening now, and then that individual is over at Cal State, so go Cal State.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the open government thing, I think, again, this morning in the keynote, Andy was talking about, the whole attitude about data and how data is kind of managed. I mean, I think in the show we did a couple weeks ago, I think I used the metaphor that I think done well, cloud is really about ditching the friction. Yeah. Things that were difficult before that we just inherently kind of gave up on and wouldn't even try. We just wouldn't do it. But now we've got access to ubiquitous storage, and we can actually I think in Georgia's case, we would have had with those 23 different campuses. I mean, the use case I kind of pull the thread on a little bit is that we can combine that information in a way that's never been combined before. We can actually see student pathways and looking at where there's kind of hotspots, and there's kind of we're looking at, particularly with a population of first generation kids. You can look at hotspots where there's it's almost like chutes and ladders, where they're kind of at risk for not being successful to get through their graduation cycle. And I mean, so you now have access to the information so you can see it, but now you can actually deploy bots, and actually you can actually send Alexa to have a conversation and say, hey, look, you need to go buy your books, or you need to actually go ahead and sign up to get your roommate and get your room reserved for college in the fall. And actually, particularly for that community, it's really difficult. The larger point, though, is that you now have access to power tools to solve problems in ways that you've never done before. And in terms of open government, in terms of just being able to leverage government as a way to actually to really support citizens and actually the warfighter needs that we've never been able to do before, absolutely you can do that. But also the data thing is actually really important, in that because I can ingest data, manage data, and show data and visualize data, I can run machine learning algorithms on data, and also with the use of APIs and being able to secure all this stuff, we can provide degrees or levels of transparency that we've never been able to do before. And actually, it's just easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that what you've been saying kind of brings up a thought I had, and maybe we haven't said it explicitly, but in the cloud environment, it seems as if sheer performance gets an upgrade relative to the data center, relative to earlier forms of client-server, distributed computing, or whatever, earlier mainframes and mini computers before that, and that the performance available instead of once every 40 seconds would be an improvement for them, 40 minutes, that itself produces opportunities.
That's
Yes?
a true statement, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, I would say the performance is a part, but also like if you think of the toolbox you kind of left when you kind of started in your first department, and you probably had probably 5 sets of screwdrivers and a hammer or whatever. But think of going to kind of an auto shop and having all these very high-end tools. So really now you're limited. I mean, you can get access to tools in a velocity and with power and with security that you've never had before. Yeah. So I mean, this is where folks on the stage here, we're limited by human resources, and that's probably the limiting factor right now. Whereas to be able to get access to secure environments, to scale up, to scale down, to get access to profoundly important, useful tools, it's a really interesting time to serve government. Let me just say it that way. And I think we can solve problems better, cheaper, and faster than we've ever been able to do before.
Yeah. I think the compute power is important, but it's the elasticity that I think Peter touched upon. That's also extremely different because you don't have to budget for all those things. Right. And just one quick example is code.org. I don't know if many of you did the week of code or hour of code. There are 100 million participants within that week of code, 2 billion lines of code. Code.org is a nonprofit. They don't have the budgets. We did a little case study. They would have had to have bought 872 processors for that 1 week of code to hit that limit. They clearly did not, and so it spikes up. After it's done, just goes right back down. So the elasticity alongside with the power of the compute, I think, is also a huge benefit that we're seeing. Smaller organizations or smaller IT shops have a lot more flexibility and agility versus going to buy that requisition of the hardware, going to buy that requisition of the software, but on and on and on. So I think there's a different dynamic there.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. That clock was set at 50 minutes the whole time we've been talking. I thought, golly, we have infinite time, but unfortunately we don't. But we haven't touched on one topic that comes up, and it has evolved. It's still a topic, but it's a very different topic than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago at the dawn of cloud, just kind of an oxymoron, and that is cybersecurity. And as the threat vectors have changed and the aims of cyber intelligence that feed cybersecurity strategies have changed, I guess we want to hear from the practitioners first what your cyber thinking is with respect to cloud and how your cyber thinking has been affected by cloud adoption.
So, touching on something that Peter said earlier, we engaged our CISO shop early, and they've been involved in everything we do. So they don't get surprised when we produce an architecture or a change to the environment. We've already talked to them, and we've gotten their input and collaboration. So generally, we already are in agreement that what we're about to do is approvable, compliant, and secure. And that helps us build the best practices, and then we do our best to templatize that with CloudFormation scripts and automation. So it really just creates a secure environment almost by default. And then we're also adding tools on top of that where maybe the native services don't provide those, to add automation on top of that, or tools would automatically check compliance or look for threats or provide traffic management or monitoring to verify if maybe use cases or users are accessing sites they shouldn't. So we're leveraging tools and automation and the whole nature of the cloud essentially to produce a better and more secure environment.
Yeah, agreed. The cloud, Peter touched on it as well. The cloud and AWS has given us a large number of tools, and sometimes it's overwhelming number of tools out there. But there's a pretty strong set of security tools out there, and without that ability to move there, we wouldn't have access to those tools. So they're extremely helpful in this space of security.
Well, Andrew, let me ask you this. Cyber intelligence has become a major activity because it helps you do the risk management and the efficient strategies in cybersecurity itself. And in a cloud, of course, each tenant is virtually separated. It looks like if you've ever been in an old-fashioned co-location center with a chain link fence and padlocks inside, and the servers were each owner. That's the virtual condition in a cloud. But on the other hand, does it offer the opportunity to do cyber intelligence such that you can say, well, this is another customer, but maybe you ought to know, customer B, about something customer A has discovered in the threat environment. Is that legitimate? Does that happen? Can that be an advantage?
Well, we can't share other customers' data for sure, but there's definitely great, we'll call it communities that we have that are collective that are sharing the best practices and all those things for sure. Even here in Virginia, there's an entire initiative around cloud computing, cybersecurity initiative around the entire Commonwealth, but it's such a big topic that even the universities are now getting involved. They're doing a variety of hackathons. We had one downstairs and starting to continuously sharpen the tools and share through the community a variety of ways of really having those conversations, sharing those best practices, and identifying some of those particular areas of threats well in advance as well.
Yeah, because Peter, in the federal government, information sharing on the cyber front has been policy for a long time.
Yep, exactly. So threat intel sharing is a big deal. I think that we touched on it earlier is we have a strong belief that you push everything from the left to right. Actually, you use approved images of containers, of operating systems, of network images, et cetera. Then you constantly push out. You allow for minimal change actually in a production scenario, but you also put the right set of instrumentation to actually. One of the kind of the big downsides with modernity right now is that new threats appear very quickly and can be exploited very quickly, right? So, a large part of how your cyber strategy has to morph for cloud is the speed, the boundary itself, how actually network traffic is going to come in, and actually a large part of what we look at is actually Unisys. We want to make sure that we are very aware of infrastructure vulnerabilities, operating system vulnerabilities, but actually the application code itself and the application frameworks, particularly open source frameworks. We want to know that we can detect day one attacks. And we've been working heavily on dynamically isolating workloads as well. So that's actually an innovation that we've been working on. But actually, time to detect and time to remediate is extremely important. And actually, speed. This is one of the issues that cloud has actually brought to us is actually you need to be on top of it. You need to be able to react quickly.
Sure. Yeah, that idea of dwell time seems to be something that everybody's got to get passed.
Exactly.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes. Any final comments on the best practices in cloud migration?
I'll just start saying, I think talent and the motion's already going there. So working and understanding the partners like Unisys, I think are an absolute incredible benefit that we have. We're also there, but we can't always scale. So having a strong coalition of partners who understand it, who have done these type of things, are one of those things that are at a premium for us. And so we continuously want to grow that. So thank you all for doing that as well.
George, final comment.
Through this journey, focus on your mission, the mission of your organization, your institution. I think that'll put everything else in the right context.
So from a VA perspective, I'd say, senior leadership support's been critical for our success. So that's one thing. The Cloud PMO, Enterprise Cloud Solutions Office, have a focal point in your organization to drive it forward. And that's going to be a big part of your success. And as a shameless plug, just on D-Day, anniversary of D-Day, the VA launched the Mission Act, which is a new program to provide better service to veterans, to make care available locally. And one of their major applications, the decision support tool, is also running in the VA Enterprise Cloud. So the cloud is helping move that forward as well.
Just in time to take care of those last few thousand Higgins Boats veterans that we still have. God bless them, still with us. You have the final 30 seconds, Peter.
Yeah, my final thoughts are, I think I said it earlier, which is there's never been a better time to be in government IT, and I think we're really grateful to be part of an important supply chain working with partners like AWS. But more importantly, I can't think of better missions than helping students in California get through, and actually particularly your mission. And actually it's a deep privilege to be able to take some of the blockers away and actually help you guys move at scale. And actually it's an extremely exciting time to serve the federal, state, and local governments in terms of fulfilling their mission.
Okay, well, I can't think of a better way to spend 45 minutes than hearing from really smart experts out there doing the job. Please join me in a round of applause for this great panel.
Thank you, guys.